for those who don't know, I'm Brian Bourgerie. I'm moderating. I just didn't want to stand up there, so I'll follow Alberto Bacco's lead and chill on the couch. But I'm excited for this panel. So I work a lot with companies moving to the island. I run innovation, investment, and entrepreneurship efforts for Invest Puerto Rico, the attraction agency for the island for investment and development. Tech entrepreneur and ecosystem builder by nature. I'm excited for this panel and all those on it because we all have a very unique viewpoint on the ecosystem and economy and different, I guess, sometimes even controversial parts of that, which we'll get into, and hopefully dispelling some misconceptions as well. So we'll just jump right in. Let's start with Jorge, and we'll work our way here. Just a brief intro of who you are, what you're working on, just your background, just a little bit.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Brian. I'm an engineer, and I started an international engineering firm 25 years ago, servicing the biopharmaceutical sector. I do process automation. And after 35 years, I just sold it back in May, but I've been about 4 years after Hurricane Maria working on an NGO I started that is called the Puerto Rico Institute for Economic Liberty. And basically, it's a free market think tank. There is a free market think tank on each of the 50 states, and Puerto Rico didn't have one. So one that was connected to the network of free market think tanks in the states. So we're called ILE, and that's basically what I'm doing now full time.
I'm Carlos Fontán. They call me the incentive guy. I basically manage the office, I think, with the longest name in the whole government of Puerto Rico, the Office of Incentive for Businesses in Puerto Rico of the Department of Economic Development and Commerce of Puerto Rico. And I manage the famous Act 60, the incentive code. So if you have any question regarding Act 60, the different incentive program that we have available in the island, they say I'm the guy.
He is the guy.
Good afternoon. My name is Rafael Rojo. Everybody calls me Rafa. I am the president of VRM Companies, a real estate development firm. We've been developing basically real estate development, mostly housing, master planned communities in Puerto Rico for the last about 40 years. I've been in the business for about 25 now. And we also develop in the Dominican Republic and Florida. And we also have a small private equity firm through which we're involved in other businesses besides real estate. So glad to be here.
Got it. So we'll kind of jump right in. Obviously, as I think anyone here is well aware, Puerto Rico as a territory has some unique aspects to it, to its economy, to the community, to everything. And depending how you view those and how you act on I guess, our status as a territory and things like that, greatly define sometimes the type of life you have, the opportunities you have, and the things that are available to you. Hopefully through this panel we can kind of understand things a little bit better. And from my standpoint, why I'm bullish on Puerto Rico in general. Obviously there's challenges, but I'm bullish. And I think we can kind of uncover maybe some of those reasons why. But to start out with, as a baseline, Jorge, you were talking about ILE and your organization and how we were the only, I'd say, advanced economy in the U.S. that didn't have a think tank in free markets. Go a little bit deeper. Why is that so important for us to be thinking in terms of free markets in Puerto Rico? And why is that important?
Let me give you a bit of a background first. Puerto Rico was a territory of Spain, or you can call it a colony, and then it moved to become a territory of the U.S. Our constitution is not formed through the traditional way the U.S. Constitution was formed. 13 colonies, the European immigrants, mostly the third son, very entrepreneurial, risk-taker. So culturally, in our DNA, we don't have an understanding of the foundations of our own constitution like they do in the U.S., which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? I say that at the DNA level because it's very basic to then understand why it's very hard for us to then understand concepts as free market and economic liberty. These are founded on property rights, limited government, individual liberties, the rule of law, and that's not necessarily understood by us as a society. When that happens, then it could be drivers of populism, paternalism. Paternalism is huge when you have a third, the one that is taking care of you. So it becomes great source of politicians search for votes. And it could be a huge enemy of the fundamentals of how a market operates. We wanted to do a think tank. I'm very big into entrepreneurship. All I've done of the 6 pillars of the ecosystem of entrepreneurship. Puerto Rico has come a long way since 2009 when we did a project with Babson on the Puerto Rico entrepreneurship ecosystem. There's one pillar that is called policy. It's the only pillar that works with the market. The other 5 pillars work with entrepreneur. So as many people have pointed out in the panels, you have a huge challenge regarding institutions that are the ones that have the authority, and have the rule of law, and have the control of your liberties, to then foster a court where the entrepreneurs can play and create value, and then drive prosperity. So the first thing we did is we enter into the indexes. There is one index that is the Economic Freedom North America. It's done by the Fraser Institute. We went in there for the first time last year. We're last. And we're last and twice as lower than the last one, which is New York, and 49 is California. And then we did another index that's doing business North America. I brought them here. This is the Economic Freedom North America. There's a small dot there. It's Puerto Rico. I'm very proud of that. Finally, we're in that map. And this is the doing business North America. First time last year, Arizona State University, the Center for Studies of Economic Liberty. And doing business, is very simple. What you look at, and we came out last. So we're at the very bottom. And basically what happens with all these great incentives we have and all these great differentiators that we have is that if your institutions are not working properly, your incentives are serving to address the market failures that you have. And then you just need to continue creating incentives to try to see how you can mitigate the market failures that are being driven by your policy. So basically what we're trying to do is how about doing the research that is needed. There's no research done in this. These indexes have been going for like 15, 20 years. Puerto Rico, nowhere to be found. So hopefully with the research and the reasoning that we provide, along with education, the policy making can be smarter to address the court where you're gonna go and play as an entrepreneur.
So that's a good foundation. We'll circle back to that a little bit later in this conversation. But first I want to hit on, you were talking about the different pillars of freedom and a free market. And one of those was personal property and why that's so important. Maybe just 30 seconds on why that's important. And then I want to jump over to Rafa. You spent a lot of time in the real estate space, which is a very major type of property. Obviously there's different types, but I do want to then kind of segue into real estate, kind of what you've seen, how you've seen real estate fitting into the economic lives of the people around. But really quick.
Sure. Property rights, the right to private property is the third pillar of the 4 pillars of a free market: individual liberties, rule of law, rights of private property, and limited government. As Hayek and Friedman used to say, the most important of them is the private property. By the way, the classical liberalism, which is the school of thought that created these ideas, came from Europe, where no one could have private property if you were not, the monarchy, the elite, the government, and the church. So basically, the father of that concept is the US Constitution, and the power of private property, which you all know, is that then you have assets that you can interchange economically. So basically, aside from money, the other thing that you can have is that private property, which represents money. Without that, you cannot enter into a free exchange, economic exchange.
Thank you. Rafa, do you kind of want to walk through just kind of what you've seen in your 25 plus years of working in this space. I guess walk us through some examples of what you've done, how you've seen just private property ownership even affect the economy or people along the way.
Sure. Well, I always like how Jorge puts things into perspective. The fact of the matter is that Puerto Rico has been really trapped in the sense that the policies that have been designed around land use in Puerto Rico have not had a lot of respect for property rights. If you take the land use plan, probably put into law maybe 12 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Unfortunately, the market in Puerto Rico is small, is too small, and unfortunately, not too many people have really understood what that land use plan means and what it does to certain private properties until they want to sell the property. That is when they find out that my property was zoned, maybe suelo rústico especialmente protegido is a very common one. If you look at a land use plan, if you take it afar, you basically see Puerto Rico is painted green. Most of that green falls into that property, and it really disrespects property rights. And I'm not going to say it is impossible to get it rezoned, but it is as hard as it can be. And unfortunately, it falls into an idea that, again, doesn't respect much property rights. It caters to many people that think that Puerto Rico should be a zero growth jurisdiction, where you've probably heard, and to this day there are still those who say Puerto Rico does not need new housing. Puerto Rico has too much housing. Look at all the empty houses, and they somehow mix the fact that yes, there are empty houses with the fact that there are enough adequate houses. And what is adequate housing? Adequate housing is the housing that somebody wants and they can afford. And if there aren't enough of houses, or in fact anything, then supply demand, as you tighten that demand and don't offer enough supply, then the prices are going to go up. And I think that's part of what's impacting housing prices. What impacting housing prices in Puerto Rico, particularly existing houses. In new housing, it is more on the cost side, but in existing house, it is a lack of supply. And then, as everybody where in the world after the COVID pandemic, we've seen a spike in demand, therefore a spike in prices. So all of these factors, the lack of really protecting property rights and how that's impacted the land use plan and then basically all the planning system in Puerto Rico, and that permeates into the permitting process of Puerto Rico. It just makes very hard to rezone and find adequate land. Obviously, again, that makes land more expensive, and that whole chain just makes building more expensive and housing more expensive, therefore impacting the amount of adequate housing supply that we should have.
Yeah, so I mean that's probably a common theme that you're aware of, and definitely are hearing throughout these panels. The friction that comes from changes, many times from government. I think in the last panel that was talked about, when government tries to lead things, especially in development or be developers, they don't think long term, maintenance, other things down the road, and I think we see a lot of that. And I could be wrong, but it seems like a lot of the issues and frictions that we run into living here, especially in real estate in this case, come from that. Now, some people, and especially certain news articles, might say that's all the fault of Act 60 and probably Carlos and me and others from attracting people to move businesses here. But in your experience on the real estate side, do you think that the amount of people who have moved down for incentives has caused or at least exacerbated maybe some of the gentrification or issues that people complain about when it comes to housing?
It's definitely overhyped. It has had an effect. I cannot say it has not, but it is in certain niche upscale markets. I'll give you an example. The biggest market for Act 60, previous Act 22, residents that have moved in the island is Dorado. If you took all the real estate that has been sold in Dorado and you measure that to the housing market, it's less than 2% of all housing sales. But there's big headlines of that one $30 million home, that one other $12 million home that got sold. Not only grabs headlines, it grabs the stories in the morning news. It's in the radio. Everybody's talking about that house. And then there are some that take these stories and then magnify them and try to create the whole gentrification narrative. They don't say it's an anti-Yankee type thing, and we all know it's always the same people, it's always the same narrative. The fact of the matter is that if you compare real estate values in the last about 15 years, if you look at, and I wish I had the graph, but if you look at housing values, average housing price in Puerto Rico after the financial crisis in 2010 up until 2020, in the US, right after the financial crisis, it grew steadily. In Puerto Rico, it decreased the home value steadily from 2010 up until 2020. The difference is after 2020, after the pandemic, because of the spike in demand, we both had a spike in prices. In the US, that spike through values above 2010. In Puerto Rico, if you take away some of those niche markets, which in my mind they're outliers, they are not the bulk of the market. If you take that away, we are not yet over the values back in 2006. We have not exceeded those values, and that's just data that is out there for anybody that wants to objectively evaluate it. So to say that Act 60 is the reason and that the Airbnb platform and short-term rentals are the reasons that are causing gentrification and pushing all Puerto Ricans out of their homes, yes, it happens in some occasions, and yes, it is a consequence of spiking values, but that is not the consequence. I actually think rising values is a good thing. I see decreasing values as a much more challenging problem with less solutions.
Yeah, actually, just following on that, I think we need to think a couple steps beyond when you think of a house sale, who's selling the house, and you were just alluding to that. It's better to have prices. If you have to choose up or down, many cases going up when you look at it from like a macroeconomic standpoint, because you have whoever's selling the house, in most cases, almost all, it's someone who grew up on the island or their family's been here. Is that kind of what you've seen?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I personally know families who lost millions of dollars from the Puerto Rico bond crisis. They had these are families that were retired, and they put all their savings in Puerto Rico bonds, and they took a big hit. And not all they had, but most of their assets were in the value of their homes. And when they saw the spike, they were able to recapture some capital, sell at a fantastic price. A lot of them are actually moving down, selling in Dorado and then moving back to San Juan. So, someone is benefiting. And yes, without a doubt, I had a friend say, well, now if I want to buy a second home in Dorado, it's going to be too expensive for me. Yes, without a doubt, that is a consequence. But if you look, I'm sure my friend Carlos here will dive deeper into that. But if you look at the amount of contributions that the Act 60 residents are having in Puerto Rico, and you are a resident, and yes, it bothers me. I pay a 33% tax break. I would love to pay 4%, but I don't. But I have to be more objective in my analysis and understand that the impact that those Act 60s are having in our budget and in the contributions that they're making, because yes, they do pay taxes. It's not real that they're not paying. The impact that they're having, if you take them away from here, guess who's picking up that bill? And it's the ones that are going to keep living in Puerto Rico. So we have to measure the whole impact, the good with the bad. It's not a perfect law. None of them are. But I think it's a positive law. And by the way, I don't think, I always say it's not in absolute numbers, but I don't think our company has sold homes to any Act 22 resident, maybe one or two that I've never found out. Certainly some in resale, but that's not what our business is based on. So I just say this as a Puerto Rican that's looking at at Puerto Rico and what laws I think are good and what incentives are good and what are not.
Thank you. So let's continue with that with Carlos. So I know Carlos has been like on a road show this year, dispelling myths of Act 60, and I'm going to give you just a second on that, but I think it's super important because sometimes you do hear clamor about how it's all bad or different things like that. As Rafa just said, it's not perfect. But I've seen a lot of good. I have the benefit of also working in economic development for the island and being able to see job creation and things like that maybe not everyone gets to see. But Carlos, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've been running into? And especially from, I mean, you're going to have a different view. The view of maybe a 19-year-old first semester college student born and raised in Hayuya or something is going to have a different view than a tech entrepreneur who moved from California to Puerto Rico when it comes to Act 60. So what are some of those misconceptions?
So basically, there are people and on some sector of the island and outside of the island that want to push the narrative that incentives are only for foreign investors, for the big pharmas, for the big hotels, I mean, for the big multinationals. That's the biggest misconception. I mean, incentives are for anyone that qualify for them. The incentive code has almost 300 pages, so you can imagine how many incentive programs you can apply. There is no incentive program in which the requirement, the eligibility requirement is based on where you were born, if you are a domestic or a foreign entity, if you are multinational. And the biggest irony, is that some of the people that push this narrative, they have tax incentives decrease. They have entities with tax incentive decrease. They are employed by businesses that have tax incentive decrease. I mean, and there is so much misinformation. And Brian, now I'm gonna say all the information that is out there is falso. I mean, we have more than 10,000 Boricuas with tax incentive decrease. And that's the message that we want to push and to get through is that all you have to do is get involved, get to know the incentive, and to apply for them because they are available. I mean, in Act 20 now, export services, almost 40% of the grantees under Act 20 export services under Act 60 are Boricuas. We do have Act 22s that are from the island. And in manufacturing, I mean, we have the big pharmacies in Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, we have 11 of the top 20 medical devices entities in Puerto Rico. We also have 11 of the top 20 biopharmacies in Puerto Rico. Almost more than 70% of the recipient of tax incentives decrease on manufacturing are Boricuas.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge one. I kind of want to dive deeper, and you can correct me in anything that I may say wrong. I think it's also important to, well, one, it's difficult. He said almost 300 pages of incentives. I work in that all day long. There's a bunch that no one ever uses or thinks about. I don't know if Gustavo's around, but he's been doing a good job, and some others in talking about the young entrepreneur incentive. I think it's worth mentioning. So essentially, if you're 35 or under, you can pay 0 taxes on your first $500,000 in revenue over the first 3 years, whichever comes first. And I think that's phenomenal. I mean, I wish I was younger, but that's phenomenal. And that specifically happens to target young entrepreneurs who live on the island.
I miss on this. One misconception, that Act 22 guys don't pay taxes in Puerto Rico, that individual investors under Act 16 don't pay taxes in Puerto Rico. I'm going to blow your mind with this stat. In 2020, the individual investors paid $130 million in income tax. I mean, the average of payment of this individual is $85,000. And to put it in context, and taxpayers in Puerto Rico, the one that pays, that do pay, the average payment is $2,000. So basically, they do pay taxes, and they have become a very relevant and important group of taxpayers for the Treasury. And they have created, alongside with Act 20 and Act 273, they have created more than 30,000 jobs. I mean, they do create, the main job that they create are on export services. The average salaries on export services is $42,000. They also invest in many manufacturing companies in Puerto Rico. The average salary is $48,000 in manufacturing. And they have invested $3.3 billion in real estate in the island.
I'll add some numbers to that. In 2020, 19.3% of the residents of Puerto Rico paid income tax. And if you take it to the 18 and 65 years old that paid the income tax, is 38.8%. So basically, 80% of the residents of Puerto Rico don't pay income tax, and 70% of people between 18 and 65 don't contribute to the tax, to the income tax. Worse yet, people that earn 120,000 and over 180,000, the two biggest brackets, of that 19.3, they represent 14.2, and they pay 65% total. So basically, of those people complaining, if there is 100 people complaining, general population, 80 people of those 100 are not contributing to what they're complaining that the other ones are. And if it's no kids and no elderly, then it's 70 of those 100. And those are the numbers for 2020 from Hacienda.
And this drives me crazy. I mean, when they use the tax expenditure report to attack the Act 60 and the Act 22, that we're missing on collecting so much millions of dollars on these taxpayers, newsflash, if it wasn't for the Act 22 or the Act 60, these taxpayers will not be in Puerto Rico. So there are there's so much misinformation, so much false narrative, and we have to deal with that, and we have to fight back.
Yeah, that's a big misnomer, especially with that exact thing you were talking about. I mean, again, at Invest Puerto Rico, we work with companies and investors moving to the island. I'd say 99-point-something% of them probably wouldn't be moving to the island if there wasn't some sort of incentive component. Now, that's not to say they're only moving to the island for incentive reasons. I've been here long enough too that I've been able to see what moves work out, what ones don't, what people are genuinely happy, what ones decide to leave, things like that. And although people maybe come down because they're incentivized, they're not only coming down for monetary reasons. Maybe some people, but I'd say that's actually the far minority in my experience. And when they're moving down, they're looking into how can they get involved, how can they invest. So, for example, just over 2 years ago, we launched the Impeller investment platform that I built. That's a platform for anyone raising capital on the island can list and get in front of over 1,000 registered investors of every type. The most active of those, about 1,100 registered investors, are Act 22 or Act 60 individuals, so angel investors who have moved down here or back here in some cases for incentive reasons. They've been the most active, and the very first deal ever funded on the platform was a cacao farm in Las Marías, completely funded by Act 22, Act 60 angel investors, oversubscribing it, who found the opportunity on the internet. They're just searching, how can I invest in Puerto Rico? They found the platform because they didn't know me. They didn't know the farm in Las Marías. They didn't even know Las Marías existed, but they did want to help agriculture, whatever. So like, that's just one example. Those who move down actually really do want to invest. Sure, there's always some outliers or a few that, whatever, they don't want to talk to anyone and just save money. But that's by far the minority. And from the tax-paying standpoint, I mean, not to share too much information, but like technically I have an Act 22 decree, but I've also been working in economic development for a nonprofit agency, and I pay the 33%, or had been paying 33% as an employee as well. So even though I have an incentive, I've also been paying those taxes as well. So that's also another misnomer. Like, just because someone's saving taxes on capital gains or dividends or interest, which in reality most people aren't making money in that anyways, doesn't mean they're not paying in other areas. They're still paying sales tax. There's a lot of property taxes, all of that. So what are some of the other things that you've been hearing, Carlos, that you want to make sure everyone in the room gets straight?
I want to know that, I mean, many businesses move to the island because of the incentive, but I want to emphasize that we also have the talent. I mean, we are not the only jurisdiction in the whole world that has incentive. I mean, many jurisdictions has incentive, but we have the talent, and we also have the relationship with the state that provides a peace of mind that you're doing business within the legal framework of the United States, and once we approve a decree, we have to honor that decree. In most of the time, the decree is effective for 15 years. It can be extended for 15 additional years. That is why when I see some legislator submitting some bills to repeal Act 22, I go like, they don't know what they're talking about, because we haven't received a new application under Act 22 since 2019, and we already approved all the decrees under Act 22, so we cannot do anything with those Act 22's decrees. And we have many tax incentives. Like 3 months ago, I was with this reporter, and I was talking about the whole tax incentive program that we have: manufacturing, export services, young entrepreneur, tourism. And she was with this fixation with Act 22. And she's from Puerto Rico, and she's a great reporter. And I explained the whole incentive program and everything, and she came back and she told me like, well, but I'm in the States and I only have 31 years, and if I want to move to Puerto Rico, I will not be able to apply for the individual investor, what was Act 22, because I wouldn't qualify. And I go like, you wouldn't qualify under Act 22, but we have so much and so many incentive programs, and you have only 31 years, so you can apply for the young entrepreneur. And if you move to the island and you start exporting services, you can apply for the export services degree. So we have many incentive programs. I don't understand the fixation with Act 22 individual investors, and the message is to have the people that know to get involved with the Act 60, to go to the DDEC, to visit our website, because believe me, I mean, I have seen I have so many meetings with so many Boricuas that they don't know that they qualify for the incentive. They do, and there's a big difference of paying 37.5% on tax on income tax to be subject to a 4% tax rate.
Go for it.
I'd like to add that I'll put my hat for my 35 years in the biopharmaceutical industry. Some of the panelists before mentioned it, but Puerto Rico, over 30% of its GDP is the biopharmaceutical and medical device industry. Puerto Rico, as a U.S. jurisdiction, produces more medicine than any other state in the nation. Yes.
More than the next two states combined.
The second one is Indiana, and the
Indiana,
third one
then you
is
have
California.
California and then North Carolina. But the installed base of the biopharmaceutical and medical device industry in Puerto Rico is par to none. You know, I have offices in Ireland and in the States, and Ireland is there with us, but it's huge. It's still huge. So it is a mature industry, so it's not necessarily needs to be driven by, at the terms of suppliers and the people that want to tend to that industry. You may not even need incentives, as it's a huge industry, well established here, and the willingness to pay and the supply chain value is similar to the U.S. So aside from other particular areas that incentives may be needed to prime the engine, this engine is full blast running, and it's a great opportunity in Puerto Rico. Just so you know, that 30% GDP, your next industry in Puerto Rico is about tourism, which is probably 7 to 8 because the population has gone down, the GDP, but is huge compared to all the other industries, and should be something never to be forgotten because it's there, and I don't think it's going anywhere. So
Basically, manufacturing is 48.2% of our GDP. It's huge.
Yeah, most people don't think about that when they think of a tropical island that is almost half of the GDP is manufacturing, which lends for some, for example, if a pandemic or something hits, instead of your economy being 80% tourism and that dropping and tanking, we can actually withstand a lot of different economic turmoil differently than other islands could. We're going to circle back to some action items, but Rafa, talking about or listening to all of this and some of our conversations before, what are some of the insights that you want to share with the audience just from your experiences, whether it's in real estate or moving into private equity, that you think people should be aware of? Or are there any other misconceptions that you've come across that you want to dispel?
Sure. I'll start by adding to what Carlos and Jorge said regarding Act 60. This law was enacted because Puerto Rico needed people and it needed capital. We still need people and we still need capital. That is a fact. Good policies are meant to, provide societies with what they need to grow, and so that people living in that society can prosper. And we still need people and we still need capital, so I think we still need Act 60. If I have one suggestion to make on that law, is that I think an important piece that should be added to that, we should be marketing much stronger to the diaspora that has moved out of Puerto Rico, to re-attract them, and using that law for that. And I also think that some of the proceeds that are going to the fiscal budget from that law should be used to give or to maybe finance a reform where everybody can benefit through those resources that the government is getting can become a discount for everybody. Then all of a sudden you might get people saying, oh, now I don't mind these people coming here and living because those resources are going to finance my discount and I'm going to be able to pay less money. As to real estate, I think there is a big misconception because after the pandemic, yes, there has been a spike in demand, but it is not what people think, and I'll put this into context. Before the financial crisis, 2008 back, Puerto Rico would produce about 12,000 new housing units every year. Every year, 12,000 units were built and were sold. That number started strongly coming down after the financial crisis up until 2020, where it got down to nearly 1,000 units per year. In the past 3 years, this incredible spike that everybody's talking about, it's still about 1,500 units. So it's really been, if you look at the data, it's there. What I think has happened is there have been some very notable projects that have had demand, in particular the upscale, higher end projects. They are in places where they can be seen. Our company built in the last 15 years over 3,000 social interest housing projects, and we were doing quite well. But probably most sitting in the audience had never seen a project we'd been building. Because of the demand, now we're building Riviera, and maybe a lot of you know Riviera, because it is a good project at a higher price in an area that is very visible for all. So I guess the misconception where I'm going with this, and I will never advocate for stricter land use rules, but as a business person, I have to recognize that it creates opportunities. If you understand the legal landscape around land use and around permitting, and it's very contrary to what people might think. as they say in español, que tiene un padrino se bautiza. That's not how permitting works. If you understand the laws, if you understand the regulations, you can get through the planning process and the permitting process with a lot of difficulty, but you can get through it. And if you do, then you can come out with a product that you will not have a lot of competition. So I think that's bad for Puerto Rico, because I am an advocate for Puerto Rico should be building not 1,500 homes. I think we should be building between 5,000 and 10,000 housing units, and aspiring to bring back diaspora and having more housing supply, more controlled, decent prices, so that young people graduate college and they come back to Puerto Rico to live. They don't live. I think as a society, that's what we should aspire to. But while that doesn't happen, as a business person, I have to take advantage of the landscape that we are. And if I can get through the complex process of permitting and get my hands on a good real estate project and develop it, you're not going to have a lot of competition. And that's what, unfortunately, the zero growth movement and all the people that advocate for stricter permitting, stricter land use zones, what they don't understand is they're really hurting society. They're making housing more expensive. They're really not hurting developers, which I think it's their aim, or maybe hurting capitalism, which is also, unfortunately, their aim. They're hurting people, and they're hurting opportunities to progress, and they're just kicking them up to somewhere in the States to live rather than Puerto Rico.
So we have a few minutes left, but to kind of recap some things, and then I'll fire off a few things and we can get some last thoughts. So, I mean, ideally, things could be made easier across the board. That's something that government would need to do when it comes to regulation and things like that. I mean, in my opinion, it'd be great if we didn't even need incentives, because the barrier to do business or to rezone or whatever was just reachable and doable and just easier across the board, and the taxes would just be lower. That's my personal opinion, not endorsing for any organization I'm affiliated with. But that being said, in the meantime, we do need to, as Rafa was talking about, do our best with what's available to us. A lot of that comes down to understanding the game, so we can do the best with that and make the most of it. And then that's where also incentives come in, to kind of mitigate. I don't want to say Band-Aid, but more of a Band-Aid than hopefully a forever structural economic structure. But the incentives, again, are available. There's so many that are not taken advantage of, like so many. Agriculture and just like tons of stuff, research and development. And I spark Carlos. So say whatever you're gonna say, and then
I mean, we have the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that basically does not under Act 60. That's a federal program. We receive annually $125 million per year. And if you are a bona fide business in Puerto Rico, you don't have to be an accepted business under Act 60 or under previous incentive act, and you have employees, and those employees are on training, we can refund 50% of the salary while those employees were on training.
yeah, that's a huge one. WIOA funds, they call it, and those are federal funds that we get every year. And I think we send like half of it back every year because we don't even use it. So there's tens of millions for training employees that's not being used. And that's another thing you'll see, which we didn't have time to get into, maybe in a different panel or a different conference or something. But there's so much federal money that comes to the island that then gets sent back because we never present a plan. We don't have maybe the competent people doing the work that needs to be done. Or there's just no one, even in the private sector, that is applying for the funds for the various projects. So there's actually a lot of money that's left on the table that we get as a territory, and realistically that we're not even paying into because we're not paying federal income taxes and things like that. So there's a lot of free money, so to speak, that could be utilized to really propel Puerto Rico in a phenomenal trajectory. And it's happening. I think we're going in a good direction, but there's so much more that could be done. So I'm just going to rattle off a couple things because I like people to come away with better understanding. So from the incentive front, some many overlooked pieces. If you're a company that when you're applying for your incentive, whether it's manufacturing, export services, agriculture, whatever, and correct me if I'm wrong with anything, Carlos, if you make less than $3 million a year when you're applying for that, there's a specific election you can can do as a small business to have your tax rate be 2% instead of 4%. I never hear lawyers or anyone talking about that, but that's just something that normally gets overlooked that I don't think should get overlooked because, 4% is great, but if you can get 2, then get 2. For those doing research and development, I think Puerto Rico is probably one of the best places in the world to do research and development. You can get 50% up to 50% of your expenditures done for research and development on the island back in tax credits. We have a very healthy tax credit market. You can sell those for 90 to 95 cents on the dollar and get capital, non-dilutive capital back in your pocket, not used nearly as much as it could or should. There's a bunch of other ones we don't have time to go into now, but I invite all of you to dive deeper. Even those who have an incentive probably could be taking advantage of something else. And for local Puerto Ricans in general, I think our utilization rate of incentives is like 14-ish%, who could be, but and are is like 14%. I think stateside it ranges from 30 to 50% use incentives when they could. So there's a lot more available that we're just not taking advantage of in general. So we're out of time. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. And if you have questions on incentives, talk to Carlos, but we're all open to talk afterwards on any of these topics, and we hope to see you again soon.
Brian, 2 quick questions
for
Carlos. Yes, very
for
quickly.
sure.
I think it's going to be for the benefit of our audience. I love that this is a very data-driven panel. So for Carlos particularly, I know that on the Individuals Act and Investors Act, the law requires that there's a donation for $10,000 per year. However, I'm aware that a lot of our clients donate more than that. Is the DDEC tracking the amounts that the decree holders are giving to charity? And second, how have the decrees changed in the last couple of years for the individual actors?
We have been tracking not only donation, we have been overseeing all the decrees under Act 22. We have been revoking decrees. From 2012 to 2020, there were only 29 revocations. We have revoked 315 decrees, so we are into that. Since 2029, there has been a boom in application, but not only Act 22 or individual investor on the Act 60. We have been breaking records in export services. We have been breaking records on young entrepreneurs, on farmers. So yes, we have been seeing a spike on the different application of the different incentive program that we have under Act 60.
Did that answer the question good enough?
Yeah, I'm just curious on the last year for former Act 22, have the decrees gone down the past couple of years?
Yep.
The decrease has gone down this year, but basically this year is going to be like the fourth year with the biggest application number because, 2021 was crazy. And 2022 also was crazy because 2020 was a very particular year. We didn't receive too many applications on 2020 because of the pandemic. So 2021 and 2022, were outliers, and now at 2023, it went back. But like I just said, it's like the fourth year with the most application under those programs.
And how many total have come down for the individual investor incentives since 2012? About.
To give you an idea, in 2021, we received close to 1,500 applications. In 2022, we received like 900 applications, and this year we're gonna finish with probably 500 applications.
Yeah, and the other years were lower.
But
so total like 6,000 or so.
But in
maybe.
context, from 2012 to 2019, the average application per year was like 400.
Yeah.
Taking out 2019 because 2019 everyone became aware of the Act 60 and that there were gonna be some more requirements on the Act, and 2019 was crazy for application, not only for manufacturing, individual investor, export services.
Yeah. Just real quick on the donation side, I don't remember the exact numbers, but so many millions and millions, if not, I don't know if it gets to billions or not, but there's a ton of money donated, especially beyond the 5 to 10 obligatory donation.
The average donation per year of this individual is $11,000.
Okay. Cool. Anything else? If not, thanks everyone.
I wanted to just say one thing about Act 22 and Act 60 that I've never heard anyone say, and that is you could attract just one person who feels welcome here, who could give you a plan to double the size of the GDP of Puerto Rico. And this making people feel welcome is very important. Just one quick statistic. There are 5.8 million Palestinians, and their total exports, probably nobody here would know, it's 1.5 billion a year. And their number one export is stone. And the education level is not that different from Puerto Rico. There's a lot of PhDs who are Palestinians who are world leaders. Puerto Rico has 3 million people and exports are 60 billion a year. And so this relationship, this powerful friendship between the United States, the superpower, and Puerto Ricans compared to the awful relationship of Israelis and Palestinians is a massive difference. And so I just think that these acts are never given credit for what they are, which is the government and the people saying, hey, you're welcome, we want to communicate, we want to partner. So thank you for extending that energy and that thought.
I'll add one thing to that. That I'm a product of 936. Many of you know 936 is the law that by Congress that drove the manufacturing investment. I like to call it the Puerto Rico's megaphone to the world. We had no other megaphone aside from our artists and cultural and sports. But in terms of economic behaviors of the Puerto Ricans, the pharmaceuticals became our megaphone to the world. If you go to Ireland and you will go through Heathrow and the terminal to Ireland is all Puerto Ricans, and you go to Boston and California or Carolina and they're full of Puerto Ricans in all these around the states. I see at 60 now as the next potential megaphone to the world. We, as an island, we're extremely insular, and if we treat them as our brothers and US citizens, they can become an excellent dot connector to the global economy that we've been disconnected for so long.